My name's Alec, and this is Lunchbox Radio Sunday Edition. Sorry about that. So last time on Sunday Edition, we talked about, or I talked about rather, to you about music rights and about what music rights have kind of done weirdly to the experience of anime openings and endings in certain cases. My favorite example of that is actually the one I gave you of Eden of the East, where a American band, Incubus, recorded a song for that opening, and the dub couldn't get the rights to this song from an American band, so they ended up having to go to a Japanese pop star and like have a whole new little kind of super compromise of an opening made for it. But in thinking about that, I came to another conclusion. This all stems from this tweet that I sent, I forget to who, but somebody on Anna Twitter. And I should have said, I think it was, if you don't own it, if you can't hold it, you don't own it. And I've got a couple examples here. One of the biggest examples currently is probably interspecies reviewers of this. And what I'm really talking about here is all of the stuff we love, all of the anime that we love to watch, all of the things behind me even are licensed and given to us, not only in America or in any country outside of Japan, but also in Japan. If those licenses fall away, go to the wayside, then people lose the ability to put that stuff out at all. One of the things that's been happening with Satoshi Kon's last work is no one wants to finish it because no one feels like they have the right to. And that's totally understandable. It's a good thing to appreciate art and to respect an artist even posthumously and all that stuff. But this also affects all kinds of different scenarios. So I've got a couple here. I want to go through them and talk about them, and you'll see what I'm talking about here, because I think one of the things that the prolificness of streaming, and especially anime streaming, has kind of taken away from many people, but not hardcore otaku, is that same idea of if you can't hold it, you don't own it. So I want to give you a few examples here. I pulled a bunch actually when I stop and think about it. So I want to start off with the first thing that I actually talked about, something in relation to what I actually talked about. This is the first, at least it's the first DVD. Oh, this is number 3, sorry. First. This is the first DVD of Paradise Kiss. I bought it when I was in a summer pre-college program for art school. And the thing about this is no longer in print. In fact, the company, which you can see right here, I'm gonna hold up to the camera here, and hopefully it focuses. Geneon went out of business real hard a long time ago. And for a while, including the time when I talked about this on this very podcast, which if you want to listen to the podcast, you can watch more on this YouTube channel, hit the bell and like to subscribe and be notified. But you can also subscribe to the full podcast. I'm only putting the Sunday editions up on here, but the full audio podcast is something you can subscribe to with the link in the description of this video. But and if you're not subscribed to this podcast and you're a listener, I encourage you to subscribe if you like the episode, obviously. But by the time I talked about this show, Paradise Kiss, which is a really cult classic show in a bunch of different ways, it's actually largely considered to be responsible for the goth Lolita fashion trend, or the Lolita fashion trend in general. It's a huge show in the kind of fashion universe of anime because that's what it's all about. But that didn't stop it from having to be license rescued and spending a couple years there, not really being available anywhere. The biggest thing I don't have in this pile actually is a demonstration is a really great demonstration of if you can't hold it, you don't own it. And that is a show, it's the original ecchi fighting girl show. But it basically it's one of the original, and they recently had a season. Oh, I forget the name of it now. It'll come to me. I'll put it in the description. But basically, this show spreads out among like five five or six seasons, and at a point, I think it's probably still like this. Each season was owned by a different licensor, at least in America. So you couldn't just sit down at one streaming service and watch it all. And that's stuff that doesn't happen as often, but it still obviously can happen. So another example I want to bring up here that's really interesting is the idea of what licensors do with their work versus when it's a profit motive thing versus we can't really like every so often when a licensor has a product, they'll do something either for promotional purposes or because they feel that the money isn't there to like be made. And that's what I want to talk about Millennium Actress. So Millennium Actress, very interestingly by Satoshi Kon, is a really phenomenal movie. And I have the Blu-ray copy here. I've actually the Blu-ray DVD combo set here. But before I bought that, it would pop on and off of streaming networks, and there was a whole thing of like, oh, you can go watch this now on Netflix, or you can go watch this on HBO or wherever it was streaming. But that was in the time before Crunchyroll was doing movies and was streaming movies, because that's a whole different licensing scheme. And if you take anything away from this, really the reason why you should be buying physical media in terms of anime, if you really like a show, is because all of those licenses are pretty complicated and pretty time constrained. And every so often you'll get a notification from a streaming app like Netflix is pretty famous for this. You'll get a notification in your email like, hey, we noticed you're watching it. It's gonna go away at the end of the month. You might want to finish your run of like this movie because it's gonna go away at the end of the month. And that means that they're losing the license and that they're not planning on renewing it, or they're not sure if they can. So with Millennium Actress, and I forget who publishes this. So this was published by Shout currently, at least the edition I have was. But for a period of time, I believe it was Sony Entertainment owned it, and they just put it up on YouTube. For a period of time, you could watch all of this fabulous movie on YouTube. I even think it was dubbed for free. It wasn't like a YouTube rental thing. And that was really interesting because it's a really well-regarded, highly lauded movie from a really well-regarded director, and it's beautiful. And Sony just kind of like, I think, and don't quote me on that, but I think it was Sony, just kind of put it out for the world. And generally when companies do that, they're weighing how much money could we make if we made this DVD available versus putting it out and, raising awareness and then making the DVD available. Because I guarantee you that's how it happened. They didn't just put the movie out because they wanted to do something cool. They put the movie out with the intent of having a product at some point that people would want. Now, the last thing I want to talk about that I started to talk about with the Genion scenario is actually the next thing, not the last thing, because there is one more example I want to have here, is what happens when an entire company goes down. Because if you're new into anime, if you've only been watching anime for, I want to say, less than 5 years, then you may not have experienced the shuttering of a company like this is the box for a copy of the DVD 2 of Steel Angel Kurumi. And the reason why I brought this out is to draw your attention to this little guy in the corner here. Once again, I'm going to hold this up and hopefully you can see the ADV logo there. And so ADV went out of business. And what ended up happening is when a company goes out of business, all the licenses go up for grabs. And occasionally you have a scenario where, and this is actually what happened with Evangelion for many, 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 many years, like decades, is they paid us one price for that license that lasted for so much amount of time. And then all of a sudden, the company goes out of business. And then that license goes back up for grabs. But once it goes back up for grabs, it's now at a different price because it may have gotten more or less popular. Now, with something like Steel Angel Kurumi, that's not a concern. But with something like, say, Evangelion, that was a concern. Like, once Evangelion was ultra popular, it was really hard for licensing companies, especially in North America, to justify spending the amount they would want to spend on this show if it wasn't going to make them anything. And one of the reasons why everyone was so worried about Netflix swooping in and getting that show was because they were setting a bar for what could be asked for a series, and that would keep some companies out of the game. And for a little bit of time, actually before Crunchyroll and Funimation were bought by Sony and combined into what Crunchyroll now is, the behemoth that it now is, Crunchyroll and Funimation agreed with each other to go into licensing negotiations together, split it down the middle of Crunchyroll gets the subtitles, Funimation got the dubbed edition, and they could enter as partners and kind of control the price ceiling a little so it didn't get too high or too out of control, because that wouldn't be good for us, the viewers. And they were right in that fact, but also I think the most right thing about that was they weren't the same company. They still had their own interests. So like you'd get Crunchyroll more interested in one show, but Funimation more interested in the other, but they'd go for both because that's the deal they worked out. At least that's what I would say would probably be most likely. And also they discounted the subscription for the consumers. Like if you would subscribe to one, you could subscribe to the other for like the same low price. It was actually a pretty thoughtful move that, while it wasn't necessarily super competitive, it was beneficial to us, the viewing audience, in a way that wasn't also super benefiting them. That wasn't benefiting them in a way that was the quote unquote free market wasn't already doing. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here is the last part of what I like to think of as if you can't hold it, you don't own it. And that is the weird aspect of physical media. So I have here and this is all of this stuff dates me, but I have here actually I bought this from a video store that is no longer in business, called West Coast Video. But I have here the DVD box set of Metropolis. Osamu Tezuka's Metropolis. And the cool thing about this DVD set is it's got a particular extra. So there's the DVD. I bought this from a clothing video rental place called West Coast Video many, like over a decade ago. That's why it's got like barcodes and stuff on everything. But it also comes with this little guy. And this little guy is all of these very special, unique bonuses and extras. And it's just this fun little mini disc that they made because they could. Really, they could have made another DVD with all of it on it, but they wanted to make something kind of novel and fun in the mini disc. But that's one of the things about mini discs specifically. One of the things about a lot of the like extras of years past is this mini disc. It's pretty hard to get to play on things. So if you have a Blu-ray player or a DVD player, you usually see what looks like the DVD like seat that your DVD or Blu-ray sits in. This sits in the little part of that seat, that like next side down, and it's supposed to be played on that next side down, but it doesn't always work. And I follow Justin Sudeikis, World of Crap over on Twitter. I believe I also follow him on Mastodon, but he spends an inordinate amount of time because he does a lot of the mastering of Blu-rays and DVDs for Blu-rays at this point for and digital streaming mastering for anime companies, for anime licensing companies. And he spent a lot of time getting like just what they call master material sent to his office or his house. And he has this whole array. I've asked him questions about it. I've talked to him on Twitter about it, of just machines. Actually, at the time of this recording, I think this week sometime, he had said like, I left a 2008 Mac Pro running overnight to do some conversions, and it basically melted down. So now I have to go fix it. And the reason why that's true is because, once again, if you don't hold it, if you can't hold it, you don't own it, especially with weird novel formats like, wrong one, especially with weird novel formats like mini discs. Because if I as a publisher want to get at these, I need something that will play this. And if I don't have access to that, then it becomes a question of, is it affordable for me to do that? Is it worth it for me to do that? How much will someone pay for the stuff on that mini disc? Now, I don't have the Blu-ray copy of Metropolis. I'm sure there is one, but my gut feeling is probably everything made it over. But that's not always true of other stuff. So I have somewhere in my collection a copy of an Etsy show called Icon. And there's a lot of information about Icon. It's got a whole manga. It's totally unhinged, but it's not something that would be transferred. And in fact, I watched a video on YouTube. I will link it in the description, or on YouTube if you're watching me on YouTube right now, of a YouTuber named Hazel, and she was just genuinely curious, and there were weird moments of intrigue that she couldn't solve because the stuff had been lost from the transfer from the DVD to the Blu-ray. And then I went looking at my DVD. I'm like, I don't think I have it either. But I had one of them, and I think I tweeted at her like, oh, this is what this is. And that kind of just human error and human omission of stuff happens all the time, which is really why, once again, if you can't hold it, you don't own it. If you love a show enough to have rewatched it countless times on Crunchyroll, to have even owned it digitally, I encourage you, even if you own it digitally and you can take a copy and put it on a hard drive and take that hard drive off the internet and put it someplace, I encourage you to do that stuff. I'm not saying go sail the high seas, but what I am saying is be conscious of A, DRM. It's always a weird thing, but B, but one of the reasons why we buy all this stuff as like otaku and otaku in general is because, especially if you're an otaku of my ilk, of my age, I'm in my 30s at this point. I've been watching anime and pouring it into my head for over 2 decades, well over 2 decades. You've seen stuff come and go. The first time I saw Princess Mononoke, the renowned Studio Ghibli film, was on VHS and was published by Miramax. Like, the VHS came out from Miramax. I now own that movie twice. I own it. I think I own the Miramax DVD, and I forget who publishes the Blu-ray currently, but I own the pretty current Blu-ray. I also own it digitally. Now, that's probably my favorite movie of all time. I'm a crazy person, but the point still stands. if you like something weird, you should probably go and grab it. So I have a copy of I don't know where my copy is actually. I actually have a copy of Interspecies Reviewers for two reasons. First, I consider myself a kind of expert on like monster girl anime or or like humanoid monster demi-human anime, because a lot of that stuff translates directly to representations of disability in anime, and you know I have a panel that I used to run about that, so I'm more than a little interested in that. So I have a whole bunch of demi-human monster girl anime. I've got Monster Musume. I've got interviews with monster girls. I've got Monster Girl Doctor. You name a monster girl thing, and I probably have it. But the other interesting thing about Ichizoku reviewers is it's the only thing in recent memory, at least, actually maybe ever. I don't want to say that and be wrong, but in recent memory, certainly, where the thing that was paid for was not the thing that was delivered in the eyes of the licensors. So licensors oftentimes will, and this got talked about in depth when it happened a few years back, but basically licensors at this point are greenlighting licenses of anime before they're finished, because especially if they're based on existing property, like Interspecies Reviewers had an ecchi manga that it was going off of, and then they take it kind of sight unseen and put it out. If you remember Interspecies Reviewers like life cycle, it got to episode 2. Like, it did not get very far before Funimation and just about every other streaming service that had it freaked out, because what they didn't realize was that the company that made Interspecies Reviewers, I forget what the production team was, just took full license with the thing. Just went and they made an H anime. It was crazy. Like it was above and beyond what anybody would ever assume this thing was going to be if you looked at the original manga. And so it immediately disappeared from all of the license services, because if you don't know anything about broadcasting adult material on streaming services, there's lots of child protection laws that you could be running into real hard and real fast face first if you do that. So from a business standpoint, that could not stand. So everybody kind of universally took it down, except for the like H anime websites, which is where you end up having to watch it if you want to stream it. And this is an important thing, because this is where anti-capitalist Alec really shows up, is Right Stuff got the rights to publish it in America. And they put up the pre-order just like anything else, because until Right Stuff was recently bought, Right Stuff's kind of position, which was, I believe, correct, I've talked about this before on Sunday editions, if it's anime, we will sell it. If it's anime, it is art, and we are in the business of selling anime in the way that you've been in the business of selling art. We are not making the judgment of what is okay or not okay. We're just gonna sell it. If a government says we can't, that's a different story. But by and large, they'll sell you anime merch at that point of all ranges, adult, non-adult, My Neighbor Totoro, Bible Black, who cares? And I always appreciated that about Right Stuff. Not that I was going looking for Bible Black, but I was going to look, but I didn't want that kind of filter being put on me as somebody who went to art school and believes in the freedom of expression and blah, 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 blah. Somebody also who grew up through the 90s when there were big companies like Walmart making decisions about what was on their shelves and making edits to what was on their shelves. Like, if you went to Walmart, the and you got a rap album, you got a rap CD, that would have been edited by Walmart. It was a whole thing. It was a nightmare. So I always appreciate that. But everybody kind of like, we all kind of looked at each other and were like, this is the chance we get this show, right? And like, we didn't all like sit in a room and look at each other, but we all, as a community, probably thought like, this is like a rare, weird thing. Like, they're not gonna nobody's gonna publish this thing twice, probably. At least for a very long time. So a whole bunch of people pre-ordered it. I pre-ordered it. Like, people pre-ordered it purely because it was an oddity in the business of anime. And the long and short ended up being that then Right Stuff, relatively after we all got our pre-order, Right Stuff was bought by Crunchyroll, and then the adult material of Right Stuff was split off from it and turned into buyAnime.com. What happens to that interspecies reviewers license? Like, what happened there with that weird little piece? Who knows? And does it super matter? Maybe not. But it also doesn't. It's not great. It's not a great look for stuff like that to just fall by the wayside. And actually, the very last thing I'll leave you guys with is, if anybody listening or watching has ever seen, what's it called? The Satoshi Kon Bat Roller Skate show. Paranoia Agent. If you've ever seen Paranoia Agent, you've probably seen it one of three ways. You've either seen it on Toonami when it originally aired, in America at least, illegally, meaning like you straight up stole it. Actually, one of four ways. Illegally, when you straight up stole it, on the original DVD release in like 2002. Or you waited for a long time until like until pretty recently for it to be released. I think it was released in like 2018, which for the life cycle of that show is fairly recent. Because it just couldn't be license rescued. Nobody was licensing it at all. So when I did my episode on it originally, it wasn't available anywhere. I had to tell people to go find it, because if they wanted to watch it, tough luck. I had my digital copy. I was good. But most people just kind of like getting into anime, if they hear Paranoia Agent at that time, were like, oh, this show sounds cool. Where do I watch it? Sorry, kid, nowhere. We got nothing for you. And so with like any of these, I really want to stress, if you can't physically hold the thing, you don't own the thing. And that includes digital downloads and stuff, because that's the only way you can guarantee that your copy won't be corrupted. And even then, there's laser rot, there's all kinds of stuff that happens to DVDs and Blu-rays. But this physical box is a thing that I can pick up and I can put into a non-internet connected appliance, hit play, and it says, okay, cool. And that's not something that I see being incentivized a lot in currently the world of anime, because streaming is so prolific, and the current trend of like, this is what's streaming, this is what's hot, is so it demands that you keep up with it. It also doesn't help that instead of being although it's probably no different, instead of being week to week in like shonen anime, we now have seasonal releases, which means that you get seasonal DVD packs, which means that they've like rocketed us all the way back to the days of like the VHS long boxes, and we're all kind of like forever incomplete in our collections. Like I have season 1 and 2 of Log Horizon, but I bought it right before season 3 dropped. So now I gotta go find season 3 eventually. So it just, once again, I'm gonna leave this here. If you can't hold it, you don't own it. Don't let anybody try to convince you that it's your favorite show will always be there, no matter how popular it is. Because there's a lot of people whose favorite show is Evangelion, and Evangelion was nowhere for decades. On that note, if you like this podcast or this video, you can subscribe to the podcast. You can also hit the notification bell to get notified of whenever a new Sunday edition comes out over here on YouTube, and subscribe to get every video in your feed. I have been Alex. This has been Lunchbox Radio Sunday edition, and I will talk to you on Thursday.